strength spiritually. Oftentimes people think of strength as being only physical or only spiritual, but in Islam, we believe in both. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Successful is the one who purified her heart. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْمِيزَانَ لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. That we sent prophets and books that people could establish justice. وَأَنزَلْنَا الْحَدِيدَ فِيهِ بَأْسٌ شَدِيدٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. So we sent iron, which is symbolic of weaponry, right? So that in case people need to be held accountable or things need to be brought to order, they can be brought to order. So that is a form of physical strength. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Al-mu'min al-qawi khayrun wa ahabbu ila Allahi min al-mu'min al-da'if fi kulli khayr." That the strong believer is better than the weak believer. And here, strength doesn't only mean like physical strength, it means internal, intellectual, as well as physical strength, as explained to me by one of my teachers. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, we find an example of an activist who is not only physically strong, but also spiritually strong, intellectually strong. And sometimes within different circles, we find people who may slant towards religion while neglecting physical strength and activism, for example, in political engagement. And then sometimes we find people in activist circles who have neglected their heart and looking after their soul. So in Surah Al-Ma'idah, we find a really nice example of Prophet Musa, alayhi salatu wasalam, who Allah says, "Udkhulu ardan muqaddasa allati kataba Allahu lakum." Enter into the Holy Land. And the entire tribe that had escaped from being under bondage under Fir'aun, they refused. قالوا يا موسى إن فيها قوم جبارين. Like, there's strong people there. We don't want to go in there. But then two people, قال رجلان من الذين يخافون نعم الله عليهم ادخلوا الباب فإذا دخلتم فإنهم غالبون وعلى الله فتوكلوا إن كنتم مؤمنين. That two people who were stronger than everyone else. And Allah mentions that they were not only physically strong, they were spiritually strong. These two people, as one of my teachers said to me, were braver than the whole tribe because they brought together those two qualities, physical and intellectual strength met with spiritual strength. So Allah describes them as two people who feared Allah. They said, go in, and inshallah, you'll be victorious. So as a Muslim, we want to be balanced. It's one of the key components of Islam is to be balanced. And the Sunnah is the balance, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Khayru umuri awsatuha." The best things are things which are balanced, alayhi salatu wasalam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah, he says in verse 143, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا. We made you a balanced ummah so that you could be a witness against the other nations. So what's called i'tidal or wasatiyah or tawazun, the balance and moderation, is a key for our success as a Muslim community. And when we fail to uphold that balance individually as well as community, then we fall into main problems. And there's a simple way to maintain that balance, and that is to remember that the goal of Islam is to bring benefit for people's hereafter in this world. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We sent you, O Muhammad, only as a mercy to all things. Allah describes him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا كَافَّةً لِلنَّاسِ. We sent you with everything that's sufficient for people, whatever people need. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. Like, don't forget your portion in this world. And of course, we all know the dua, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. So that balance is important when we understand that it's founded on achieving the benefits of this life and the next. Without that balance, we become people who are just steeped in opulence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that in numerous places, زُيِّنَ لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا, right? The beauty of this world, the ornaments of this world have been made appealing to the disbeliever. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Inna li kulli ummatin fitna wa fitnatu ummati al-mal." The Prophet said that every community has a trial, and a trial of my ummah, a trial of us, is going to be wealth. He said, إِنَّمَا أَخْوَفَ مَا أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ أن يخرج الله لكم زهرة الدنيا قالوا ما زهرة الدنيا so قال بركة الأرض. I said that the thing I fear for you most is that the earth's offerings will be made accessible to you by Allah. And they ask him, like, what does that mean? He means like the beauty of this world will be made like appealing to you. So that without being rooted in spirituality, we become simply, conspicuous consumers, and we fall into the cult of the material world. And that's extremely important to frame tasawwuf as an act of spiritual liberation and resistance against a post-colonial economic system that has largely been created to make people slaves and servants to a dominant force, which is largely very Western Eurocentric. That's just a reality. So when we fall into that kind of cult, where we're just worried about, trips to Sephora and Yeezys and six-pack abs and what kind of filters do I have, and taking really cool pictures on top of buildings, and then we lose our ability to be emancipated as a prophetic community. We become those that Allah describes about in the Quran, ثَاقَلْتُمْ بِهِ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ. We become stuck to the earth. And this is perhaps what you see now. The most difficult challenge of the Muslim community is the bling. And we're not talking about the bling of Jannah, we're talking about the bling of dunya. On the other side, and we see this also, is to neglect the amassing of political power and the need to have an ability, because political power is the ability to achieve an ask, And if we don't have that ask, then we will not be able to achieve what we want. And I see Yasmin has her hand up. You can unmute yourself, Yasmin, and ask a question. Maybe Yasmin accidentally raised her hand. I think you're muted, so we can't hear you. So our achieving a balance should not neglect either or. So, alhamdulillah, in the month of Ramadan, it's a time that we want to amplify the vision of our souls and to connect with the fact that we don't need to be valued, right? That's why it's called Shahrul Mubarak. The word Mubarak even is translated sometimes as a blessing, but that loses the essence of the meaning. The word Mubarak actually is from Buruk. And Buruk is a camel that you could use to cross the desert, who needs very little provisions and very little attention from its master. So it's Mubarak. La yut'ibuk, like it's not going to cause you a lot of problems. So a person who has barakah is not necessarily a person that has a lot. A person who has barakah is someone who Allah has guided to use what they have, to make do just like that camel, mashallah, with the resources that he or she has. So what I thought we would do when we come together, inshallah, is read from an important text that I've been working on for a while. It's translated, almost done, sort of, and then add an explanation to it. And I can share this text with you as well, inshallah, by Imam As-Suyuti. Imam As-Suyuti, who was, of course, one of the great intellectuals of Islam, someone who was free-thinking, someone who was not simply just given into copying people in the scholarly world, but someone who really had a unique intellect and was able to employ that intellect in ways that up until now, like the number of things that he contributed to the Muslim thought, intellectual thought within Sunni Islam, it's hard to quantify them. Like it's tremendous. His output was tremendous. So in the chat, if you look, inshallah, you're going to see a link. This is to the unedited version of the text that we can go through, inshallah. Before we start, does anyone have any questions or any concerns or needs? We did a check-in earlier, and one person, mashallah, out of a number of people checked in with us, but then we just got started because I know everyone has a lot going on. Any questions before we get started, inshallah? So when I come to these gatherings, we'll just be reading from this book. which is, mashallah, it's a really, really nice text, alhamdulillah. And then maybe when we're back at the IC, we can continue to read from this book called Itmamul Diraya from Imam Sayyidina As-Suyuti rahimahullah. Okay, let me see. Did you try to cut and paste that link into your browser, Mariam? I think that's going to be the easier way. You should just cut and paste it and then link it into your browser. See if that works. Let me know. If it doesn't work, I can do, there's something else I can also do here as well. Yeah, I'll just... Yeah, I think you have to... I think you can cut and paste. It's allowing me to copy. No, it's okay. You're not allowed. So I think if you with your mouse just kind of, you can I think copy it. I don't think you can cut it, and then you want to paste it into your browser. And you guys let me know if that works. Nice, great. So we'll get started, inshallah, and we'll take maybe 20 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions. And we'll cover, the beginning of the book is a little heavy, but then alhamdulillah, as we continue, it gets easier. So the book is called Itmam Diraya fi al-Qira'ah al-Niqaya of Imam As-Suyuti rahimahullah. And Imam As-Suyuti, he actually wrote this book. It's a really interesting book. It covers the pedagogy of the Muslim world in his age, like what's taught and what it is. And his last chapter is on at-tasawwuf, spirituality. And he begins and he defines a tasawwuf. Tasawwuf is from the word which means like will. And it's tasawwuf to Islam is what like tajweed is to Islam. Tasawwuf is the word for a science. And that science he defines, he says, tajreedul qalbi lillahi ta'ala wa ihtiqar ma siwa. Actually, this isn't his definition. This is the definition of Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, who said that tasawwuf is to strip everything from the heart for the sake of Allah, the Most High, while debasing everything except Him. When you read this definition, immediately you should feel that it's somewhat off balance, right? This is not a balanced definition, and this is one of the legitimate criticisms of Imam al-Ghazali, Allah yarhamu, is that number one, he was a Neo-Platonist, so he was influenced deeply by Platonic thought. His attitude towards humanity was one which is very morbid. And if you read in his Ihya, he kind of projects this like sadness onto the masses and divides them into three categories. So oftentimes his definitions of things are a little bit extreme, because Islam is not asking someone to completely peel their heart from everything except Allah and to debase everything except Allah. So for that reason, there are other definitions of tasawwuf which scholars shared, which are much more balanced. He said again, one of the 5 kind of goals of Islam under the idea of bringing benefit and preventing harm, one of the most important is balance. And what does it mean, balance? That I don't do anything that harms my hereafter, and I don't do anything that harms the permissible dunya, right? Achieving that balance is very important. So one of the scholars, he said that tasawwuf is ilmun yu'rafu tu'rafu bihi ahwalu tazkiyati an-nafs wal-nufus wa tasfiyat al-akhlaq wa ta'mir al-zahir wal-batin li nayli as-sa'adat al-abadiyah. He said that, tasawwuf is the knowledge of the state of the heart in the purification of outer character. State of the heart means like what my attachments are, my love, my fear, my anxieties, right? Having that knowledge. And you can see how in the contemporary world, there's kind of an intersection between like psychology and tasawwuf, right? So understanding how to purify my heart of bad attachments, to purify my character. And then he uses the word zahir and batin. Zahir means my acts of worship like prayer and hajj and zakah and how I treat people. Al-batin means the state of my heart. We have 2 other words for this. Af'al. Af'al are actions of the limbs. The ahwal, actions of the The other word, the words he uses, Dhahir, or you can say the physical, and Batin is the spiritual. I don't like the word spirituality. It's strange to me. So I use the word heart. What's going on internally? Imam al-Qushayri, he defined it, and the science, by the way, for the Dhahir is fiqh. And the science for Batin is at-tasawwuf. And I know the word Sufi, tasawwuf, it's like very controversial because of especially the Saudi influence, da'wah as-salafiyya, in some of its historical iterations, engage some of the more, what we would say, unhinged tasawwuf. So as Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, his Haraka al-Islahiyya in the Jazeera, the founder of modern day Salafism, as he begins to spread his da'wah, he faces military opposition from people, not only the Ottoman Empire, who the Saudi state opposed and rose against the Khalifa in Turkey to remove, but also there were different types of Sufi movements within the Arabian Peninsula that were doing some weird stuff. So that's why when you see sometimes the Salafi movement categorizing all Sufism is wrong, you have to appreciate that their context and their experience with Sufis wasn't very good. They were dealing with some weird stuff. So it's not fair also for them to project their experiences with any group to the larger group. And we have an axiom in Islam that says, al-hukm ala al-am muhal. It's very difficult to give one judgment for everybody. It's a very beautiful axiom in Islamic law. So that means you got to nuance, you have to engage, you have to see, there are different like iterations of this movement. But it's very important that we understand that Salafi Islam is not Islam. Salafi Islam is a presentation of Islam that has its own historical origins, that has its own environments that it had to engage with, that has its own challenges, that has its own financial backers, and in the case of other movements, has certain experiences which may be good or bad. It's important to know this about any Islamic movement or group, right? An Islamic movement or group is not something holy or sacred. They're human beings, and they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to have a specific set of experiences and optics that impact their worldview. It's very important to understand this. So we'll talk about this in a second. Is all Sufism wrong? This guy's a Sufi. Well, we have a very beautiful axiom in Islamic law that says, La jarha bil madhab. You're not allowed to dismiss somebody because of their madhab. Like you can't use a term. So for example, Imam al-Bukhari, he narrates on behalf of Shia because he understood that there's a greater depth than just dismissing somebody because of the camp that they belong to. Imam al-Shafi'i in his Musnad, right? He narrates a hadith from people who are Shia. He doesn't care that they're Shia. He's worried about, he has differences with them, but he's able to nuance those differences in a way that ultimately can find, is this person really like more beneficial, and so on and so forth. So the same thing also we should do with anything we hear about. We shouldn't just buy into it, because what we're hearing, whether it's from me or whoever, right, is coming from a given set of optics that restrict that person. We're not alim hakim. Another definition of tasawwuf is by Imam al-Qushayri. Imam al-Qushayri is to the science of Sufism what Imam Malik is to fiqh. Imam al-Qushayri is to the science of Sufism, what Bill Gates is to Microsoft, what Steve Jobs is to the iPhone, in the sense that he's one of the major teachers and players in the science. And he said, هو الدخول في كل خلق سني والخروج من خلق كل خلق دني, which means that you enter into a space where you work on achieving great character, and you exit making sure that you rid yourself of the negative characteristics that may be in your life. Is tasawwuf a bid'ah? This is kind of the issue that I addressed earlier, and I talk about in the text. It's common to hear people claim that such and such thing is an innovation. Bid'ah, while certainly important and often indicative of a person's love for Islam, right? People are passionate about faith. If misused in the name of love, that person can cause tremendous pain. We all know if we've ever been in relationships, love can cause pain, right? Just because I love something doesn't mean that I'm going to act right with it or that I'll be responsible with it, because there is a difference, and especially when we're talking about religion, between passion and scholarship. Someone can be passionate about something and completely wrong. Abu Tayyib al-Mutanabbi is the great poet, mashallah. He warned against kind of like, untethered emotional attachments to things, or just being passionate, right? Just being charismatic. Samiri, he was charismatic. He got people to worship a golden calf, right? His passion and his excitement, people should be able to see through that. Sayyidina Musa, he doesn't have all the filters and the bling. He has a speech impediment, but he's saying the truth. So the Muslim is someone of discernment, is someone who sees beyond the fluff. So what we need to be careful of is that when people are passionate, whether in public spaces or online, about something being wrong or right, without the evidence, we should be cautious. So Mutanabbi says, "Ar-ra'yu qabara shaja'a shuja'ani huwa al-awwalu wa hiya mahalu thani." Sheikh Mutanabbi said, to think before being brave is two braveries. Ya Allah. Or to think before bravery is to be brave twice. Right? Because I brought together strategy and I'm acting on that strategy now. I'm not just unbridled bravery. The bravery is rooted in being intellectually grounded. And that's one of the challenges of postmodernity, the age that we live in now. Pre-modernity is largely known by respecting revelation. It has its own problems politically, of course, because it was largely defined by monarchy and feudalism. And then modernity is where science removes revelation as a reference for people. And now we live in postmodernity, where the individual, how I feel, what I think, is replaced science and replaced revelation. So the altar of this age is the self. And you can see this in the followers of like white nationalism and different types of kind of strange populist movements. Identity politics sometimes is being used to amplify these issues so that we no longer see ourselves as collectives, but we are all like, well, this is how I feel. This is how I feel. And the outcome also of this, there's a great book on the lack of respect, for specialization. So like knowledge doesn't matter anymore. It's like that's what I think, So Al-Mutanabbi is saying, be careful of this. You should have intellect before you run into like just having an emotional opinion. فإذا هم اجتمع لنفس حرة بلغت من العلياء كل مكان. He said, if, and he's using bravery as a metaphor for any kind of emotion or attitude. If those two things are brought together, proper knowledge with proper emotions, into a free person, like meaning they're intellectually emancipated, they're not someone who's like just following the status quo, then that person will reach the highest stations. Mashallah. So passion without expertise can cause serious problems. And expertise without passion could be hypocrisy. So Allah says, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ. You should know that there's no God but Allah. And you should seek the forgiveness of your sins. You have to know. Here's a quote, you can read it later, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, one of the early scholars, about the importance of knowledge. So we say that something is bid'ah just because we heard other people say it or we're passionate about it. That is not acceptable. Like, that's not how life works. That's not how Islam works. Islam says, قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Bring your proof if what you say is the truth. Imam al-Raghib al-Asfahani, the great scholar, wrote a beautiful dictionary, 2 volumes on the words of the Quran. He said, Al-Ibda' insha'u sun'atin bila ihtida'in wa iqtida'in. That the word bid'ah comes from a word which means something that comes out of nothing. Like it has no previous cause, nor is it example, and nor is it like related to anything you've ever seen before. It's something completely new. وَإِذَا اسْتُعْمِلَ فِي اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فَهُوَ إِيجَادُ الشَّيْءِ بِغَيْرِ آلَةٍ. And that's why Allah's name is Al-Badi', because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates without matter. He creates matter from nothing. That's the word ibda', right? In its linguistic form, to bring something from nothing, which is impossible. Law of thermodynamics, and that, like we know as human beings, we don't have the ability to create matter nor destroy matter. Wala madda, wala zaman, wala makan, and that Allah, in order to do that, doesn't require a time, a space, or a location. وَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ بَدِيعُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And of course, the only one that we can talk about in these terms, being able to create matter from nothing, is Allah, because He, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 116. وَالْبِدْعَةِ فِي الْمَذْهَبِ. And then he says, according to theology, bid'ah is إِرَادُ قَوْلٍ لَمْ يَتَسَنَّ قَائِلُهَا وَفَاعِلُهَا فِيهِ, is that someone would introduce a idea, an action, or and what he means by قَائِلُهَا here means is like the person who said it is not established this action within the reservoir of the Quran and Sunnah. بصاحب الشريعة وأمثالها المتقدمة وأصولها المتيقنة. And what he does here is he opens up this difference of understanding about innovation in Sunni Islam. And that is that we've had two major schools. One is that everything is a bid'ah. Like anything religiously that has never been done before is an innovation. It's the opinion of Imam Malik, even though his own madhab differed with him, and people like Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, and of course Imam Ibn Abdullah Wahhab, and the Salafi movement now. And this was always the minority, by the way. As far as this opinion, has always been the minority. Imam al-Asfahani, the great Shafi'i scholar, is from the majority. So he alludes to this idea that a bid'ah is something that does not have explicit or implicit support. Explicit or implicit support. The other school, the minority, is a bid'ah is anything that doesn't have explicit. Implicit is automatically understood to be a bid'ah in this school. Whereas school of Sayyidina Imam al-Asfahani, the majority, is that a bid'ah is something that does not have explicit, like salah, or implicit gathering together to read the Quran after Fajr, support. Ibn Athir is a great scholar and great historian. He said, في أسماء الله تعالى البديع. One of the names of Allah is al-Badi', وهو خالق المخترع لا عن مثال سابق, which means that Allah has created and brought something into existence which was not in existence before. That takes us, of course, to the statement of Abdullah, of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab, when he saw people, they were praying Taraweeh, and they were separate in different places, and he brought them together into Jama'ah, and they prayed. He said, Ni'matul bid'atu hadihi. Unfortunately, we find some people adamant about their interpretation of this statement, where, subhanAllah, it can actually have two meanings. And those two meanings go back to the two different madhabs within Islamic history that I alluded to, the minority and the majority. Because the minority say this is just saying it linguistically, like al-bid'ah means like, this is like a cool thing that we've done. The others say, no, this is his using of al-bid'ah bima'na bid'ah al-mahmuda aw al-hasana. Like this is a good thing. The evidence from the majority is overwhelming, to be honest with you. And I'm biased, that's the school I'm trained in, so you can take it with a grain of salt. But the Prophet said, Man sanna sunnah hasanatan, whoever brings a good sunnah, whoever follows that person will share in the reward. The man who was praying behind the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet said, Sami Allahu liman hamida, and the man said, Rabbana wa lakal hamd hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fi. The Prophet turned around and said, who said that? He said, I did. He said, I saw the angels running to count what you wrote. He didn't tell him this is bid'ah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who came to Sayyidina Bilal radiyallahu anhu, and he asked him, why is it that I hear your footsteps in Jannah? And Sayyidina Bilal, he said, well, every time I make wudu, I pray, I just pray. Whatever I want to pray, I just pray. Ma kataballahu li, whatever Allah has written for me. And the Prophet didn't tell him this is bid'ah, this is an innovation. And this evidence is used by Imam al-Shafi'i and the majority of jurists, as mentioned by Imam al-Dhahabi, to say that if someone is doing an action that has an explicit or implicit support in Quran and Sunnah, then this is not bid'ah. And this is where people differ. Like Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, when he would make wudu, he would wipe up to his calves, although it's considered makruh, right, in most books of fiqh, to wipe above your ankle. And when people ask him, he said, I want to make sure the light in Jannah on my body is more. Because we know ghurratul muhajjalin, people who make wudu, they're going to be glowing in the hereafter. Nobody told him this is bid'ah, this is an innovation, you know. And in fact, I read one time one publication where someone actually accused Abu Huraira of bid'ah. So if for anything we want to take from this opportunity is to appreciate that there were two schools of thought on this issue. They never really fought. They never got into like fisticuffs as we see today. And so that takes us to the question is, does a tasawwuf as a science have a explicit support? The idea of a science which focuses on purification of the heart, improving our character? Absolutely, right? قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Successful is the one who purifies the heart. And also, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You know, the Prophet was known to have great character. Prophet said, أَلَا وَهِيَ الْقَلْبِ. The source of all things is the heart. And the Prophet said, أَقْرَبُكُمْ إِلَيَّ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَحْسَنُكُمْ خُلُقًا. You know, those of you who are closest to me in the hereafter are those who have good character. So obviously there is support, just like tajweed has support, just like Arabic language has support. Even Juzay, he mentions in his tafsir, actually 7 sciences that the Quran gave birth to. One of them is tasawwuf, and then he mentions in the Quran there are actually like 20 different contexts of where tasawwuf is found in the Quran. So that takes us now quickly, and we won't take a lot of your time. We'll start the first part of his book of Sayyidina Imam al-Suyuti. But before we do that, does anyone have any questions that they want to ask? And then we'll wrap up, inshallah, in the next 15 minutes, inshallah. Does anyone have any questions? You can either unmute themselves or they can type it in the box. So what we'll do is go through the advices of Sayyidina As-Suyuti, inshallah, about the science of the heart and how to improve our inward connection to faith. You know, my teacher used to say the outward connection to the faith is the flower, and the inward connection is the icing, right? The outward connection to the faith, you know, is the milk. The inward is like, you know, the Fruit Loops. You know what I mean? The sweetness. I mean, it wasn't just them who used the 99. So Sophia's asking a good question about using the 99 names of Allah for healing. It wasn't just them. This is also found in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who said that there, you know, in some names of Allah, there's Ismullah al-A'zam, that if Allah is asked by it, He will respond. And also there are established precedents for the Sahaba using, for example, Surah Al-Fatiha as a healer. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas is related by Imam Muslim in the Muwatta. He read Surah Al-Fatiha over someone that was stung by a scorpion. The Prophet used to use قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ, as mentioned by Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. So this has a precedent. The way people may use these things is the other issue. But the generality of using the names of Allah, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا. The Quran says Allah has these names, invoke Him by these names. So, you know, as long as it's not involving, we're going to talk about this later on, right? Like corruption or violating the sacred law, then there's not an issue there. You know, Imam al-Junayd, he said, if you see a person fly in the sky, you shouldn't obey that person until you see how he acts with the Quran and Sunnah. So people can certainly invoke and use the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for different things. Just we want to make sure that people aren't being taken advantage of and other strange kind of things. So the first advice, that the first part of the text, Imam As-Suyuti is going to give us 9 advices that are going to help us frame ourselves individually. 9 things that we should think about that encompass largely attitudes, our attitudes towards Islam and towards faith. And I like to talk to people and I tell them, you know, you want to teach people fiqh, you should teach them about the attitudes of Islam. Oftentimes having the proper understanding of things allows us to escape some of the snarls that shaitan has left for us. Like when people get sick, they're like, is this because Allah hates me? It's not an attitude of Islam. People like experience loss in the dunya. Oh, Allah hates me. That's not that's Judaism, to be honest with you. Judaism has this kind of battle in its tradition between God and man. Islam doesn't frame tests as a sign of Allah's hate. In fact, a test, as we'll talk about perhaps later, can be a sign of Allah's love. As the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at a man or woman and he knows that through their actions they will not be able to achieve success in the hereafter. So he tests them because he knows that they will be patient. And their patience, as we know in the Quran, that the reward for resilience is unquantifiable. إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّى الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرٌ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. Allah says the people of resilience, their reward is infinite. So we don't see material loss as a sign that Allah hates us or test that Allah hates us. It's the opposite. We see that if we're resilient, the test is an opportunity. So those kind of attitudes. And that's why I worry in Islamic schools, we fiqh kids out, right? We fiqh them out, but we don't teach them the attitudes of Islam. And those attitudes are so general and so universal that they're going to equip someone with a broad set of tools that no matter what situation they're in, they will be able to kind of apply the medicine of their religion to the situation. So the Shaykh, he says, فَرَاقِبِ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى فِي جَمِيعِ حَالَاتِكَ. And here he's talking about where to start. Like, where should you start? Like, where should I start if we really want to work on increasing our spiritual capacity? He says, فَرَاقِبِ اللَّهَ. The word raqaba is from the word muraqaba. Muraqaba is from a word ruquba. Ruquba is a woman who lost all of her children except one. And I had a friend, subhanAllah, this happened to his wife, Allah bless her. And with the child that lived, she was so cautious, like extremely protective. So that's ruquba. Muraqaba means that I am protective of my relationship with Allah, like that woman is protective with her child. Ya Allah. So I'm careful not to fall into sin. The believer is focused, man. Like that's one of the statements the Prophet, al-mu'min fatanu qais. The believer is focused. The believer is worried about slipping. So I have muraqaba, that I'm careful in my relationship with Allah. Fi jami'i halatik. In all of your states. Bi'an, how do you do this? Tabda'a bi fi'l al-fara'id. Is to start with the obligations. What's fard? وَتَرْكَ الْمُحَرَّمَاتِ, and leaving what's haram. ثُمَّ النَّوَافِلِ وَالْمَكْرُهَاتِ, and then you move on to the extra deeds, and then you move on to avoiding the disliked. Imam As-Suyuti is now giving you a rubric, a GPS on how to map spirituality. That's very profound and simple, but it's beautiful. That is number one, start with the obligations. There is no tasawwuf without the obligations. There's no tazkiyat an-nafs without the obligations. When we take religious obligations out of purification, this becomes like Western spirituality. This becomes like people in this becomes like, Jennifer Lopez and Alex Rodriguez and Justin Bieber, like on a mountain smoking weed and talking about how they feel so close to God, right? When we take the fara'id out of spirituality, religiously, this is deemed as delusion. When we see people in the name of Sufism like stabbing themselves and all this weird stuff, this is called delusion. This is called bid'ah. So Sheikh Suyuti says the first way to Allah is to establish the obligations, to work, to do your best to establish the physical and emotional obligations. وَتَرْكَ الْمُحَرَّمَاتِ, and to leave the forbidden. And then after that's done, then work on the voluntary acts of goodness, and then work on disliked behavior. So he says, and here's the translation, If you've understood that well, then be mindful of Allah in every situation by observing the obligations, avoiding the prohibited, and then establishing the voluntary while reducing the disliked. And here's a brief explanation. To be mindful of Allah is to observe Him in all situations, which is impossible. That is done by observing the halal and haram. So how do you witness Allah in your life? How do I live the statement of the Prophet? To worship Allah as though you see Him. This doesn't involve the eyes, right? It involves belief. And that's why we call it belief in the unseen. When I adhere to the halal and avoid the haram, I am admitting that I believe that something is commanding me to do this that I can't see. So that's why Allah says, الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ. Those who believe with the unseen. So ihsan is intrinsically tied to fiqh. Tasawwuf and fiqh are like two peas in a pod. You can't separate them, because if I'm not observing the halal and haram, then I can't claim to be witnessing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in my life. The way that I witness Allah in my life is not a physical witness, because Allah is beyond that. La yudrikuhu la absar. Like Allah says in the Quran, no human eye, no physical eye can see Him. But I see Allah what's called mushahadat. Sufis call this mushahada. I witness Allah with my heart and my mind, that I choose to obey the God that is unseen, as though He's here telling me not to do this. That's called iman bil ghaib. So that's why the Sheikh, the first thing he touches on is extremely powerful in theology. And that is that by adhering to the Sharia in a moderate way that aligns with the Sunnah, that is the greatest sign that I am a muhsin. There's something else packed in there that he's not saying. And that doesn't have to come with a buzz. You know, people ask me like, man, like I worship, I just don't feel anything. You know, I pray, I fast, but like, I don't feel anything in my heart. You know, some of the scholars used to say, if you worship Allah for the feeling, then you worship the feeling. Like, do we think that the Sahaba in Uhud, they felt good? But that's an act of worship. So establishing worship is not about a feeling, and establishing worship is the greatest indication that I am living a life of ihsan. As the Prophet said, to worship Allah as though you see Him, even though you can't see Him. You know He sees you. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So to be mindful of Allah is to try to observe Him in all situations, and that is done by observing the halal and the haram. And this is how we should frame halal and haram, especially for young people, man. Not just don't do this, don't do that. No, your commitment to halal and haram is a direct indication of your love for Allah and Allah's love for you, and how Allah has guided you and interfered to make sure that your heart stays upright in the face of the currents of the world that are constantly trying to erode your commitment to morality and faith. Imam al-Muhasibi said, إِذَا أَحْبَبْتَ أَن تَعْرِفْ مَنْزِلَتَكَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ فَأَعْرِفْ مَنْزِلَتَهُ عِنْدَكَ. If you want to know your status with God, ask yourself, where is God with you? And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said, worship Allah as you see Him, even though you can't see Him. You know He sees you. Of course, seeing Allah is impossible, but our observing His commands is evidence that we see Him. Thus, the first step on the path to Allah is to establish the obligations. And this is the hadith which is used to lay out this principle. And that is that the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said that Allah said, whoever shows hatred to a friend of mine, then I have declared war against him. And my servant, and this is the part, and my servant does not draw near to me with anything more beloved to me than the religious duties I have obligated upon him. So that's the first step. وَمَا تَقَرَّبَ إِلَيَّ عَبْدُ بِشَيْءٍ أَحَبَّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُ عَلَيْهِ. That the person cannot come close to me with anything more beloved to me than what I have made an obligation, what I've made fard. And my servant continued, and fard here means two things: the fard to do and the fard not to do. The obligation to do, the obligation not to do. Obligation to pray, obligation is to avoid not praying, right? So there's duality in the word fard. And my servant continues to draw near to me with voluntary deeds until I love him or her. And when I love him or her, I become the hearing by which he sees and she sees, the sight with which he or she sees, the hearing by which he or she sees, the hand by which he or she grabs, and the foot by which he or she walks. Meaning they are observing the rulings of God as though God is with them. So what I look at is right. What I listen to is right. What I use my hands for is right. What I walk to is right. That's what I was explaining earlier, the idea of ihsan, to worship Allah as though you see him. The next part, and we'll stop here inshallah, is but what if someone can't obey him? You know, sometimes it's a lot to do. You know, I remember when I was in a community in St. Louis in the 90s, early 90s, brother came to the Imam and said, Imam, it's a lot to do. Can't do all of it. You know, actually, a man, he came to the Prophet, he said, Inna shara'i al-Islam qad kathurat. It's a lot to do. And the Prophet said, you know, make dhikr. So Sayyidina Suyuti says, what if you don't have the ability to obey Allah? What if that's hard? What if I have some weaknesses? He said, وَلَكِنْ اِهْتِمَامَكْ بِتَرْكِ الْمُنْهِ أَشَدْ مِنْ فِعْلِ الْمَأْمُورِ. He says, you know, very nicely, Allah yarhamu, if, as you start this process, make sure that your priority is leaving the prohibited first. More so than observing the commands. Somebody may not be able to pray Fajr, new Muslim. Somebody may have trouble observing certain acts of worship. So at a minimum, just don't do haram. This is very profound because haram in theology is synonymous with harm. That's why sometimes in the Quran, instead of using the word haram, Allah uses the word filth. Instead of using the word haram, he uses pain. Instead of using the word haram, he talks about things that hurt you. So we should teach that haram is something that can hurt you. It brings harm in this life or the next. So we have a very important axiom that we're going to talk about now. That if faced with two choices, bringing benefit or preventing harm, Sharia as a system usually puts preventing harm first, because packed into preventing harm is obviously a benefit. Here's the explanation of what Imam As-Suyuti is saying. So after he said, you know, start with the obligations, وَلَكِنْ اِهْتِمَامَكْ بِتَرْكِ الْمُنْهِ أَشَدْ مِنْ فِعْلِ الْمَأْمُورِ. You know, be more focused on avoiding the haram than doing good in your process of growth. Start there. Because it is usually easier to stop something than to perform something. So I remember when I converted, it was easy to stop drinking and smoking weed and dating, but it was hard to pray Fajr. It's hard to wake up early. So my early growth as a convert was largely about avoiding things. And then that creates light in your heart, mashallah. And then you're able to see and grow, and you gain the strength that you can stand, and then you begin to worship Allah more. So because it is usually easier to stop something than to perform an act, importantly, however, this principle touches on one of the foundations of Islam, what I just mentioned to you, dar' mafasid awla min jalb masalih. That preventing harm comes before achieving benefits. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. We see states across the country now opening, right? Telling people go back to work, especially people that are in a middle class and down. They're not telling rich people to go back to work. Do you think that the axiom in front of you now, what would this axiom say about that? Should people go back to work to achieve monetary benefit? Or should people probably stay home and be helped out by the government in order to prevent harm? I'm going to let you think about it, because it's not a simple answer. But if you took this axiom, preventing harm is first before achieving benefit, what would Sharia say about an early released from quarantine? Anyone can chime in. Feel free to unmute yourself. Just a question. All right. So understanding the challenges associated with performing obligatory acts, scholars coined a rule. This is a very good rule for you to learn. In lam tutiq an ta'bud Allah fala ta'si. If you can't worship Allah, then at least don't disobey Him. In lam tutiq, like if you don't have the power and ta'bud Allah, to worship Allah, meaning to do good, fala ta'si, then at least don't disobey Him. And this is also found in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ما نهيتكم عنه فاجتنبوه وما أمرتكم به فافعلوه منه ما استطعتم. What I prohibited for you, abandon it, and what I have commanded you, do it as best you can. Nice. So Mary is and we're going to stop here, inshallah. Next time, we're going to talk about living a life of purpose. Like how do I, as a faithful person, sometimes the concern, and this is even within Muslim communities, that the more religious you are, the more limited your purpose in life can be. How do we flip that on its head? One of the biggest challenges of the Muslim community is the inability to allow its collective imagination to expand. It's largely been inhibited by its experiences over the last few years. So Mary is sharing her thoughts on the quarantine and this axiom of Islamic law: preventing harm comes before achieving benefit. She said, no, people should stay home a little longer because you can go to work and get a paycheck, but infect someone or may be infected, right? May kill somebody. Somebody may infect someone, they may die. Fatima, mashallah, Mushtaq is saying, wa alaikum salam, it has to be gradual, like letting people back. If pursuit is solely monetary benefit, then it should be avoided, because that's jalb al-musarih yuqaddam ala dar al-mafasid. So the Sharia, would actually say the quarantine should probably continue and be guided by Dr. Fauci. You know what I mean? Should be addressed by people who can tell us when is the opportune time for people to go back in a way that preserves the health of the majority of the people, because preventing harm comes before achieving benefits. MashaAllah. Any other questions? Sophia, I don't know if I can answer that question because my training is limited to Islamic law and Sharia. My background is certainly not, I apologize, in the areas of mental health. But I think that I know that the ICNYU has a number of resources that people can utilize and make things easy for people. So inshallah, next time we will continue reading this text, inshallah, together and try to finish a good part of it, inshallah, before the month of Ramadan. And then if, we're still in quarantine or we're still locked up, and there's interest, in the text, I'll speak to Imam Khalid and we'll try to make sure that this happens. I think it's next week, or I'm not sure. I need to check the schedule, Mary. But if you go to the ICNYU.org announcements, you can find those things there, inshallah. How's everybody? From Salam.